Until recently, a lack of justice data obscured the scale of the failure to meet people's justice needs, but more and better data has become available. This data is now available in the Justice for All report, the flagship report of the Pathfinders Task Force on Justice. The report estimates that 5.1 billion people are deprived of justice, and approximately 1.5 billion people have justice problems they cannot resolve. If we are to solve justice problems and close this justice gap, we are to empower people and communities.
I hope that action will follow in all regions to bring about a meaningful change in people's ability to access justice.
I'm delighted to welcome you to today's discussion on people-centered justice. I'm Sarah Hossein. I'm a lawyer practicing in the Supreme Court in Bangladesh, and I'm here today on behalf of BLAST, the Bangladesh Legal Aid and Services Trust. And it's really clear that in terms of the issues we're speaking about, that there are huge challenges that we have to face, that people have to face on a daily basis in terms of delivering justice to our communities. The pandemic has, of course, exacerbated these. It's heightened the inequalities that already exist and are pervasive in all of our societies, but it's also created new and unique obstacles and challenges. People throughout the world, and in particularly dramatically in our region, have suffered the loss of livelihood and income. People are in desperate straits, and we can't refuse to acknowledge that.
Worldwide, more than 5 million people do not have meaningful access to justice. At least 244 million people live in extreme conditions of injustice. They are modern slaves, are stateless, or their countries or communities are riddled with conflict, violence, and lawlessness.
Hello, everyone. On behalf of the organizers of the Asia Pacific Justice for All webinar series, it is my pleasure to welcome you all today to the final installment of this series. My name is Ivy Ong, and I'm a Senior Regional Coordinator for Asia Pacific from the Open Government Partnership. So before I continue, I would like to bring to your attention an important housekeeping matter. You're pleased to offer simultaneous interpretation in English, Bahasa, and Bangla. If you're using a computer, please click the interpretation button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You'll see a globe icon. And select your language to listen to the meeting. So if your interpretation is for English, you'll see English. If you're looking for Bahasa, please go on the Spanish channel. Again, Bahasa Spanish channel, or Bangla is German. Go to the German channel for Bangla. everyone must choose a language. Again, Bahasa is in Spanish, Bangla is in German channel. If you're joining Zoom through your smartphone or tablet, please see further instructions in the chat.
And now I'd like to invite our Bahasa interpreter, Johannes, to the floor to read the instructions in Bahasa. Johannes, you are on mute.
Dengan senang hati, kami mengumumkan bahwa akan ada simultaneous interpretation atau pengalihan bahasa simultan ke dalam bahasa Indonesia dan bahasa Bangla. Jika Anda menggunakan komputer, harap mengklik tombol interpretation di kanan bawah layar Zoom Anda. Di sana Anda akan melihat satu ikon bola dunia dan Anda dapat memilih bahasa Anda. Untuk bahasa Indonesia, pilihlah saluran Spanish atau bahasa Spanyol. Untuk bahasa Bangla, pilihlah saluran German atau bahasa Jerman. Setiap orang harus memilih suatu bahasa. Dan jika Anda mengikuti Zoom lewat HP atau tablet, harap melihat petunjuk lebih lanjut di dalam ruang chat. Terima kasih.
Thank you, Johannes. And now I would like to invite Ashif to the floor to read the instructions in Bengali.
আজকে সকলকে এখানে ধন্যবাদ আসার জন্য। এখানে আজকে এখন আমরা এই যে প্রোগ্রামটা যেটা দেখব, এখানে আপনারা আপনার ল্যাঙ্গুয়েজ চুজ করার জন্য দুটো জায়গা করা আছে। যদি আপনারা ইন্দোনেশিয়ান ভাষা করতে চান, আপনারা ওটা স্প্যানিশ ভাষাতে যোগ দিবেন। ওখানে দেখবেন একটা ইন্টারপ্রিটেশনের একটা চিহ্ন আছে, ওখানে গিয়ে আপনি দেখতে পাবেন সেটা। আর যদি আপনি ইংরেজিতেই শুনতে চান, আপনার ইংরেজিতেই ওখানে সঙ্গে সঙ্গে শুনতে পাবেন। আর আপনি যদি বাংলায় যান, আপনি জার্মান ভাষাটা চুজ করবেন এবং ওখান থেকে আপনি পরিষ্কার সবকিছু শুনতে পাবেন। ধন্যবাদ।
Thank you. Back over to you, Ivy.
All right. So I hope you found your channels already. And let's get started. This session will explore the ways that cross-sectoral partnerships can advance justice for all, aided by the co-creation process embedded in the Open Government Partnerships multi-stakeholder approach. We know that for legal empowerment efforts to take root and multiply, governments must understand and value legal empowerment efforts. Positive collaborations between governments and the legal empowerment communities look different in various countries and localities and might result in regulatory reform or financial support. Such partnerships and collaborations where different stakeholders bring to the table their experiences and perspectives for the purpose of a common goal undoubtedly have the potential to deliver improved justice services for citizens. Collaboration is at the heart of the Open Government Partnership model. Through dialogue between government, civil society, and citizens, we can come up with better solutions to society's most pressing problems. When we work together, solutions that are more responsive to people's problems can be found. The need for dialogue and collaboration is particularly impactful in the justice sector. Why? Because law impacts nearly every aspect of life for citizens, from housing to employment, from divorce to getting your water switched on, from public safety to civil rights. Legal issues are everywhere. Every society needs a means of resolving conflict peacefully, justly, and efficiently. Across the globe and here in the Asia-Pacific region, informal systems of justice are a critical part in that ecosystem, since formal justice systems and providers may not be accessible or are not preferable. Informal systems are critical for those living in poverty, those who are disproportionately affected by poor public services, and for whom access to justice also means access to health, education, and water. We have great examples in OGP of how collaborations between formal and informal actors are improving access to justice for citizens, including two that you will hear about today from Indonesia and Mongolia. So let me introduce our speakers. To discuss collaboration in Indonesia, we have Ibu Hesti Pandanwangi, Director of Law and Regulation from the Ministry of National Development Planning, and Feby Yonesta, co-chair of the Indonesia Legal Aid Foundation, to discuss a collaboration to support access to justice in Mongolia. We have Ms. Sunjid Nugar, Project Coordinator, Civic Engagement Project, which is supported by the Ministry of Justice and Internal Affairs Mongolia and Swiss Development Agency, and Ms. Badma Porevdorj, Justice Program Director Manager from the Open Society Forum. Their bios are in the program, and a link is being pasted in the chat right now. So we will hear from our panelists for the next 30 minutes. Each speaker will answer 2 questions and take 3 minutes to answer each question. And then we'll open up to a discussion with all attendees for an hour. So please feel free to post in the chat. When we're ready to open the floor for discussion, we will bring in your contributions then. At the conclusion of this session, we will have our closing segment to wrap up the Justice for All webinar series and talk about next steps. So let's get started. My first question is
Pertanyaan
for...
pertama saya,
My first question is for all our panelists.
আমার প্রথম প্রশ্ন সকল প্যানেলিস্টের জন্য।
We'll go in order of the partnerships as I've listed them.
এবং এখানে আপনি প্যানেলিস্টের কাছে যেতে পারেন যেভাবে লিস্ট করা আছে এদের নামগুলো।
Ibu Hesti and then Feby from Indonesia.
Ibu
followed
Hesti
by
এবং ফেবি ইন্দোনেশিয়া থেকে।
Sunjid and then Badma from Mongolia.
তারপরে সঞ্জিত এবং বাদমা মঙ্গোলিয়া থেকে।
Ashif, this is Timber. Please mute, and Dolly, please pick up the interpretation until I can place you in your channel.
Okay.
So the first question for our panelists, can you share how you work together through OGP to address the justice problems of people and increasing access to justice in your country? Ibu Hesti?
Okay, thank you, Ivy, for the introduction, and hello, good evening for all. My name is Hesti. I'm the Director of Law and Human Rights from the Ministry of Planning, or Bappenas. We can, usually we can call my institution Bappenas. So I will share how the government have the collaboration and coordination with the civil society and other stakeholders for relate to the support the implementation of access to justice. Government of Indonesia and the CSO were created an action plan. It started at the end of the year 2018. For the first time, we agreed upon the commitment to increase quantity of legal aid organization to provide legal aid to the poor, and parallel with the increased quality of the services. At that time, we have around 310 legal aid organization that have already verified and accredited by the government. And the commitment was concluded as a OGI action plan year 2019 until 2020. And nowadays we are hand in hand, have a lot of intensively discussion with facilitate with the Open Government Indonesia Secretariat, which is in Bappenas, established in Bappenas. And we are starting discussing the proposals from the civil society regarding the action plan for year 2021 until 2022. The process of formulating the national action plans begins with the collaboration, like I said before, between the government and line ministry and also the civil society organization. During the pandemic situation, the Secretariat arranges several virtual meetings because we are not be able to meet directly. So virtual meetings is the best solution for us between Bappenas, related line ministry, and the civil society organization. We discussed about the several action plans that proposed by the civil society organization. So I think the key points is to implement the principle of participatory policy making, and open government is created through this kind of collaboration. So my Directorate of Law and Regulation, we plays active role as a hub between the OGI Secretariat, civil society organization, and line ministry in collaboration to prepare action plans and some indicators that is going to be handed to the OGP Secretariat, especially specifically in access to justice commitment. The active role of my directorate is to assure that the implementation of several proposal activities we can navigate towards the achievement of midterm national development plan year 2020 until 2024, and then yearly plan 2021 and 2022.
plan
So we have several proposals that is related to the inclusion of vulnerable groups and gender and providing legal aid for the victims. And then the second one, development of legal aid information portal within the related and relevant line ministry, like Ministry of Law and Human Rights, and also the Supreme Court, and expanding the access and capacity of legal aid services. The other one is implementing regulation for the assessment for psychosocial needs and person with disabilities at each stage of the trial proceedings, reparation policy for victims of human rights violence, and strengthening support for legal aid implementation for access to information. The other is related to the anti-corruption. It is related to the disclosure of beneficial ownership data. So I think for further success of implementation based on the proposal of the CSO and will later on we discuss with the line ministry, I think we have to have action to sharpen the program and activities of the related line ministry based on the proposal that could support implementation of the action plan 2021 until 2022. During the process, Bappenas will also exercise which proposals are effectively achievable within the next 2 years, and then we will assist the process of planning and budgeting towards the implementation of action plan through the state budget, or we can also discuss with the development partners to the alternative funding. It is going to be related either to support the line ministry or the civil society as well. So the government of Indonesia and the CSO is in the process of concluding action plan, and we will deliver to the OGP Secretariat soon. hopefully this procreation process could produce action plan between the government of Indonesia and CSO, not only to encourage the transparency and accountability of legal aid services through this OGP platform, but it will also perform the commitment of SDGs implementation by the government of Indonesia. So Bapenas also will assure that contribution of the government of Indonesia and CSO could increase the performance of program and activities related to access to justice. And the role of Bapenas as a system integrator and clearinghouse for national development policy and collaborative action from stakeholders will hopefully achieve goals towards implementation of access to justice as stated also in the midterm development planning policy in the next 5 years. I think
Wonderful.
that's all my explanation. Ivy, thank you very much.
Thank you, Westy. Great start to showing how collaboration happens in action in Indonesia. So I would like to call on Feby to hear his perspective on what's happening in Indonesia. Feby?
Thank you, Ivy. Good day, everyone. Good day, Ibu Hesti. So my organization, the Indonesian Legal Aid Foundation, was first introduced with open government partnership at the OGP Global Summit in Georgia. Since then, my organization has been officially engaged in this platform with the first co-creation to develop action plan in justice sector through the OGP cycle of 2018 to 2020. We really appreciate the support of the Ministry of National Development Planning and commitment of the National Legal Development Agency. Despite the time constraint at that time, we were able to submit Indonesia's action plan around justice sector. It was the first commitment on justice sectors, including expanding and increasing the quantity and quality of legal aid services. Given those experience in the previous action plan cycle, we learned that open government partnership can be a strategic platform to pursue civil society advocacy in improving justice-related policies, in this regard, the national legal aid policies. Therefore, in the cycle of 2020 to 2022, we tried to expand the involvement of more civil society organizations who were working in justice sectors to propose more commitment around legal aid reform through the open government. We were quite surprised with the enthusiasm of civil society network to engage in this process. Through an intensive consultation among civil society, we have submitted the CSO's proposal in justice sectors, which include the establishment of portal to legal aid information and database. It's also been explained by Ibu Hesti, the expansion of access and capacity of legal aid services, including increasing the number of verified legal aid organizations promoting local legal aid regulation, especially in Papua region, increasing a number of and capacity of paralegals, implementation of legal aid standards and quality, and legal aid for access to information. And then also we submit proposal around inclusion of the vulnerable and gender-based group to legal aid services for victims, access of the disabilities and psychosocial to justice system, an effective regulation to support the victim of past human rights abuses in Aceh, and as well as transparency in criminal justice system to support more open civic space. You can see from that proposal in justice sector, it was beyond legal aid. It's different with the previous cycle. It's also touched the justice systems and involve other justice-related ministries or agencies. We were currently in a trilateral process with the relevant ministries to negotiate whether the proposal of the CSOs can completely be adopted or need more adjustment with the existing program of each ministries. And we really appreciate that even in this cycle, the Ministry of National Development Planning, the Secretariat of Open Government Indonesia, as well as the national legal development agencies keep on supporting the openness and willingness to collaborate with civil society in developing the action plan. We really hope that the CSO proposal will finally being adopted and becoming the commitment of Open Government Indonesia and submitted to the Open Government Global. I hope it answered your question, Ivy. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Feby. Really good to hear the stories from Indonesia. So from Indonesia, we now travel to Mongolia. I'd like to ask Sunjid, please, to respond to the question.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay. So in Mongolia, we have one research which conducted by the World Justice Project in 2017. And we see all these needs of citizens, legal and justice access. According to this data, encountered the Mongolian citizens in their everyday life, pertaining to the legal awareness and knowledge, ways and situations of solving those problems. As of the last 2 years, 64% is it. So, and all 66% of them had not taken any actions to solve this problem. And 59% knew about this, how to get advice and information, but 41% responded that they hadn't been aware of their rights. So if you think about this, those peoples who don't know, who are not aware to justice access, and it's most people are vulnerable, and it's low income people, and maybe they live in remote areas and vulnerable, marginalized.
Sorry, Sunjid, could you place your slide in presentation mode so we can see your slide? There's just a request. Sorry to disrupt.
It means that one.
Can you click present so we can go into, I think you can go to view for slideshow.
Slideshow.
Or that, yeah.
Now, is it correct?
No. I think we still can't see it yet. Can you go down, if you look at the bottom of your screen?
Yeah.
You can see there's a plus minus sign, right? And right beside the minus, there's a book that's open, and then there's like a screen icon. Can you click that screen icon?
Share screen and then screen icon.
I think you were okay already earlier. Yeah. Sorry, please go ahead. And if you could also please speak a bit louder. No worries. So please go ahead.
By the OGP, no, I can't see it. Hello.
Yeah. Please go ahead, Sunjid. It's okay.
Okay. So our organization is Civic Engagement Project, which is cooperating Swiss Development Agency and also Ministry of Justice of Mongolia. So it's one sub-project which we have 3 components, and one component is very related to the OGP civic engagement issues, and that one is public awareness raising activity and capacity building activity. So in Mongolia, Mongolian government adopted one national program which calls public education for all citizens. So it was in 2018, and actually it is leading, Ministry of Justice is leading this program, but all kind of ministries should contribute and cooperate to this program implementation. And National Legal Institute is one organization under the Ministry of Justice who works as secretary of this National Public Legal Education Program. So related to this, in order to implement this national program, National Public Education Program, we are providing this public awareness activity and also all kind of products to deliver to the citizens. That's our contribution, right? And it's just not only these booklets, pamphlets, brochures, and videos, audios, podcasts, and maybe some social channels. Also, we are trying to prepare some multiplicators like young journalists. We have one program in recent 3 years we launched. We prepared young journalists in governance program, which is very successful, and we have now 85 participants, and they are very empowered and very interested deep in governance context. And for example, they are now, some of those young journalists are now legal paralegals. They attended this legal paralegal trainer, and also they work same time as journalists, right? So that's their contribution to the OGP. And actually this in National Action Plan, which we are now following, here was formulated civic engagement. It's increase access to information and transparency and openness, accountability and civic engagement, which must be led by ministries and partnership. It must be partnership with the civil society organizations, also the all media channels and other organizations. It must be. So after the 2 year, after 2 years that we are implementing this national legal education program, our project is really to contribute and to provide some evaluation, midterm evaluation, because National Legal Institute, together with Open Society Forum and also with the Ministry of Justice, with other organizations, they prepared a lot of paralegals, about 800 paralegals. They trained in nationwide, and also they started launched in 10 other provinces, this legal corner, and also this web platform. They are preparing and delivering all these materials to the citizens. So in next year, we will provide this midterm evaluation. How was it? And if it's user-friendly, if it's useful, if it was useful, especially for the targeted groups like the people who lives in remote areas and who lives in a targeted group like marginalized group, and maybe gender reflected issues and income reflected issues, etc. And we can see if it was useful and how we can change our public awareness activity further.
Thank you so much, Sanjid. Learning a lot about what you've done. From Sanjid, let's go over to Padma. Padma?
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you are hearing me well. Okay, so I work for the Open Society Forum as a Justice Program Manager, and I oversee some of the aspects of legal empowerment work. And past 4 years, we've been deeply engaged with this legal empowerment initiative. Starting from 2016, we've been working in the two fronts. One is with the government of Mongolia to really make sure that there is a to contribute to establishing the legal empowerment mechanism that would help the most vulnerable and marginalized groups to access the primary legal information and services. And secondly, with the second front of our work was focused on really working with the community organization to really help them to kind of shape and redesign their work as serving the communities and to really include the legal empowerment elements in their work. So those two are kind of two fronts of what we are doing. So we kind of serve as a coordinator and really helping these two fronts. I mean, two approaches, top down and bottom up approaches, to meet in the area, in this like the point where they can perfectly meet and really complement each other. So that was like kind of been one of the major focuses of our work past 4 years. And what we had achieved in the past, and how it is it's linked to OGP. Let me talk a little bit about that. So as you see that with the OGP, Open Society Forum has been very actively engaged in development of the National Action Plan, working as a key coordinator of bringing all of the civil society groups who are interested to contribute to the National Action Plan. And in the last development of the last action plan, starting in 2018, we had been also leading and advocating for specific commitments, which has been reflected and included in the action plan as we had formulated. So basically the commitment number 6, the increasing legal knowledge of the vulnerable and marginalized groups through paralegals. Well, it says a stakeholder legal guide, but it actually means paralegals. So Paralegals is one of the commitments that we have managed to include, and it's been a quite smooth process because the advocacy process has started 2 years back in 2016, as we have done the legal needs assessment and already started working with the government. And so the government has already acknowledged the importance of this work, and then it's been included in the action plan of the government of Mongolia and subsequently to the national action plan submitted to the OGP. So it's been like in the process, and it's because we've been engaged and because we were in the central part of it, we were managed to have that in the actual direct paralegal term was being included in the national action plan. So in the past 2 years, we have been quite successful in terms of really building the infrastructure for delivering those services. So we had helped the Ministry of Justice, specifically the National Legal Aid Center, National Legal Institute, to come up with the curriculum and train over 900 paralegals nationwide. So with some of the fundings and supports from the other donors, but largely from our funding. And also we've been supporting some of the civil society groups, working with some of the groups that the government is not able to reach out, which includes the survivors of domestic violence and people with disability, people living under the negative impacts of environmental pollution, as well as the mining activities. Also, we have the groups who are internal migrants and been affected by the poor redevelopment plans, etc. So we are kind of trying to reach out to different groups, and basically, in larger sense, we kind of piloted all of these kind of efforts and initiatives, and now it's really taking its shapes and up and running, and we're just inviting all other bigger donors to really scale it up to the national level, including the Swiss Development Agency and the Civic Education Project, the Civic Engagement Project, as well as like German technical assistance, bilateral donors as well. So this is where we are.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to our panel for excellent experiences shared during this first round. So mindful of time, before we go into the second round of questions, we would like to bring in a few of the interventions that we planned in advance that we hope to bring into this conversation by unmuting. So please bear with us as we hopefully make the technology work here on Zoom. So I'd like to first invite Noreen Chaudhry, Senior Program Manager with the Laudes Foundation, to share how philanthropy is an important partner to advance legal empowerment of workers in Bangladesh. Noreen, please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Okay, I'll try and make this very quick in the 3 minutes that I've been allocated. And third, thank you so much for inviting us. And I think I'll start by giving a little bit of overview on who we are, and I'll make it 30 seconds. We're part of the Laudes Foundation. It's a family philanthropy that's operating in Asia, Europe, and Latin America. And to keep things simple, and I'll put our website on the chat link later, but basically we're working on addressing the dual crisis of climate change and inequality. And especially, and it's something that Ivy, you actually mentioned in the intro remarks, is access to justice means access to water, access to livelihoods, access to remediation, which irrespective of whichever facet that we're working on, access to justice becomes an integral issue of what we're trying to achieve in establishing equality for all the constituents, especially the marginalized communities. With that, I think we already have one of our key partners, Sarafa from BLAST, who we've been working with in making access to justice available for the marginalized and underrepresented community of the 4 million workers that we have in Bangladesh in the apparel sector. And in terms of what's worked really well through that collaboration and some of the other similar initiatives we're supporting in the other region is, and I think Dr. Sanjeev attributed towards this, the importance of media. I think access to information is one of the stepping stones towards access to justice. And that's what we've done quite successfully with BLAST by making the first ever worker app available in Bangla, in making that information available in real time on what are the legal clauses, who they can go to for remediation, get real time information and connect with the paralegals. The second aspect that works really importantly is building a common narrative. Someone once said to me once, individually we beg, collectively we bargain. Rather than having each of the constituents moving in their separate direction, can we build a common narrative around access to justice for marginalized communities by bringing in the movements together, be it climate, labor, or gender? And the third thing that works really well, especially in this context, is using the tools available in enabling access to justice to work, to push back against the backsliding of laws. That's increasingly that we see happening in the region, and also as part of the recovery efforts, if we ever recover from this crisis, is there is going to be eminent backsliding of laws, especially labor laws. We already see that happening in different parts of the world, especially in Asia. So in a nutshell, key pieces of advice is making access to information available, prioritization of issues, reduce fragmentation upon civil society groups, and movement building. Is that helpful?
Yes, incredibly helpful. Really great to hear about the usability aspect, and building that legal capability of citizens is critical. So a reminder as well for our attendees, you're free to use our chat for any questions you might have for our panelists. So please feel free to use that, and my colleagues are monitoring the chat as well. So from Noreen, I'll just go back again to our panelist Feby. Feby, we just heard from Noreen about her discussion on how philanthropy can help. In your perspective, what types of resources, including but not only financial, what types of resources are important to grow legal empowerment efforts? And how do you sustain partnership when we know that these activities require a multi-staged approach to fully implement?
Thank you, Ivy. I fully agree that in terms of resource to grow legal empowerment effort, it cannot be limited to only financial resources. However, a sustainable financial resources is important to support any legal empowerment initiative. In this regard, we need to further involve not only donors and government funding support, but also to include private sectors as well as crowdfunding in supporting the initiative. The challenge will be how to develop best strategy to mainstream legal empowerment in Indonesia's philanthropic trend, while it was still dominated by humanitarian and religious motivation. Other than that, we need to also expand more involvement of civil society organization, community-based organization, legal professionals, students, and social workers to take part in the legal empowerment efforts. Some initiatives such as community paralegals and pro bono collaboration were examples that we are working on right now. However, it also needs government recognition and protection, as well as support to mainstream and developing culture of legal empowerment amongst community and legal professionals. Those invaluable involvement of CSOs, CBOs, community paralegals, legal professionals, social workers, or volunteers, I believe would ease all challenges that we have so far been facing in initiating legal empowerment. I want to highlight about investing the future of legal empowerment through more involvement of students. In this context, it would be necessary to develop curriculum around legal aid, which include legal empowerment, and insert it and adopt it into a faculty curriculum. My organization has been reaching out to students through our annual legal aid workshop, so-called Kalabahu, in 16 provinces across Indonesia, as well as collaborating with faculty legal clinic. However, such initiative would be more effective if it is supported by government legal aid policies that include legal aid and legal empowerment into the faculty curriculum. I guess it's my response, Ivy. Thank you.
Really good food for thought, Feby, on the importance of building that constituency and the importance of government as well. So after Feby, I think we can now move to our question for Sunjid. Sorry, hold on. Sunjid, what are the most effective ways to improve public understanding of the formal and informal justice systems so that people and communities can make better informed decisions about where to bring their justice problems?
Yeah, if we see the research report, and that report was concluded that this we have to look at the difference of groups. They have different needs and different knowledge and different education, and also the living condition is very different. That's why what we should think about it first of all It's about what they need as legal information or justice access, or what's their need. We have to find out it, and whether they, where they live, and what's the living condition, and what's their special particular needs and specific wishes and conditions. So if we know about these needs, then we can find these directions, what kind of information we can deliver and we can offer to these marginalized groups or to these groups who lives outside in remote areas of city or in the center of city or in provinces. Like these differences are very high. That's contrasting. That's why we have to find out it. And for example, for the people who live in remote areas in Ulaanbaatar in Mongolian capital city, we had found that they need some comic books, like illustrated books for those people are most relevant, and they will interest about it, and they will read, just see these comic books. And then on the comic books, we can put these hotline numbers and maybe some websites if they can use, etc. So that's why for the youth, for example, they just will watch these short videos and social medias, just very short, just till 1 minute, no longer, and no hard, no abstract contents. That's why we have to consider which kind of social groups we want to reach out, and we have to look at their needs especially. And we have to find out technological innovation. How can we use all this technology and this media, new media channels, and because based on age differences, based on gender differences, and etc. So the main experience of mine is we have to find out this different needs, and then we have to find out that proper channels to these different social groups.
Really good point there, Sunjid, on understanding what would make the most sense and what would be usable based on who will need to understand the information. So now I'd like to invite Maya Daruwala, Senior Advisor at Tata Trusts and Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative, and Chief Editor of the first India Justice Report, to share how the foundation directly took an activity to advance reform of the justice sector in India. Maya?
Hi, good morning.
Please go ahead, Maya.
Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm going to talk about the India Justice Report, beginning by saying that as advocates, especially passionate advocates of justice, we often use a great deal of commitment and passion to our work, but very often facts and data are missing. So we can't make an informed or unimpeachable argument. Equally, at the same time, when we are talking with government, and very often we are struggling with them to overcome resistance, we start off with government should do this or government should do that. And that is an indication of our idealism, but it's not an indication of our informed participation when we actually get placed on the table to do this. So with that in mind, we started out thinking about how we could get much more information out into the public in a way that would be easy to understand and yet provide everybody with a baseline. We found that data is something that is very important and that governments themselves are using. But this data is siloed often. It's kept, people who collect the data, and government has a lot of data, but the police data will be with the police. The judges' data will be with the judges and so on. So we wanted to bring that all together and to show how this big picture, what was the big picture if we looked at it? We also wanted to use it to create a ranking system to show how the subsystems of the justice system, which is police, prisons, legal aid, and the judiciary in an area, how do they work together? Have they got enough capacity to deliver according to the mandate? Can they really perform with all of the capacity do they have, with the capacity that they have? And so when we were looking at police, prisons, legal aid, and judiciary, we looked to see what is their manpower, their infrastructure, their budgets, their workload, what is their diversity, and tried to bring all of that and put it side by side. Now, we didn't want to make any subjective decisions or judgments. So we decided to take only government data and measure it against what the government had promised. So in our case, for instance, in India, the government had promised that they would like to have 30% or 1/3 of the police be women. So we looked to see how far that they had achieved this. Somewhere we found that the most amount of women that were in a state agency was 18%, somewhere 3%, somewhere 5%. So now we could point that out so you could see that what the governments next had to do. One of the, so many of the findings were like this. For instance, money was in short supply everywhere. So 85 to 90% of all the money that government had, government was spending on salaries. So that explained how you have very little money for any other kind of program. Then you had something like, there were huge vacancies across the pillars. The vacancies were sometimes as high as 80%, but on average 20%. Then we found that if you did fill in the vacancies, like for instance, if you filled in the vacancies for judges, you would immediately fall short of the infrastructure. If you fill in the judges' vacancies, you'll find that the court halls are too few. So all these correlations could be built in when we put all the data together. Very importantly, we also measured the trends. For instance, if a state, like one of our biggest states, had said that we are going to improve our policing or our judges or our legal aid by 10% or 20%, but actually they had not done it at all. Or some states had gone beyond and done it much better. So the public has now a view of the governance from the beginning of 5 years to the end. So you can see the intention of the state. Is the state intending to improve its performance and its delivery for the people it is serving? So we looked at all the anatomy of all these things, put it together, and we ranked the states. Now next year, this was all in November of last year. Now this year, we're going to bring out a comparative to what was last year. Have things improved? Have things not improved? We're going to try and do this every 2 years so that we can build a brand. Now, who did all this? It was about 6 of us. When I say 6 of us, I mean 6 different NGO organizations and a very generous donor who brought this together. And when we presented it, when you're talking about collaborations, when we presented it to one of the highest policy-making bodies, they were very impressed with it. But they said to us, well, why haven't you talked about outcomes? So we said, this is the first time we're doing it. And so we're presenting the data and we're showing you in factual terms what there is. Maybe as we go along, as we get experience, we will feel confident enough to give you strong outcomes on which you can decide to make recommendations. Now, the last thing I want to say is we did a national thing. It took us about 15 months to do it. But what I'm recommending, and I strongly commend, for active citizens and for foundations who support them, like the Open Society, like the other one that we heard of from Bangladesh, is you can do this in your own locality. You can look at the anatomy of the justice delivery system. How many judges are there? How much legal aid is there? How many policemen are there? How many police stations are there? And do this for your local public, so that your local public becomes stakeholders and necessarily informed stakeholders, so that you can see what the justice system in your own locality looks like. After all, justice is the business of all of us, not only of a few policymakers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maya. Great example of how philanthropy can deploy resources to advance legal empowerment outside of the traditional funder role. And to learn how another government responds to justice needs, I think we can go back now to Indonesia, to Ibu Hesti. Ibu Hesti, how can governments harness the potential of informal justice mechanisms or actors to help meet the justice needs of people and communities, particularly for women and vulnerable populations who may be underserved by the formal justice system?
Okay. Thank you very much, Ivy, for your question. Well, I think we are all trying to do the best for our country. So first of all, I would like to say that from the legal aid program, as you know, maybe the Indonesian aid program consists of a litigation and non-litigation program. And we can utilize the non-litigation program to encourage the legal aid organization assist the needs of the people. I think we can start by encouraging the National Legal Development Agency in the Ministry of Law and Human Rights to conclude some regulation, for example, for the legal aid organization to put some attention for their services towards the for the cases for women and other vulnerable population. In the non-litigation program, I think we can also encourage the mechanism settlement like a mediation, and also we can conduct the legal education and dissemination as part of the legal empowerment mechanism for the people. And I think the BPHN itself, within the Ministry of Law and Human Rights, also provide several programs as a legal awareness program in the village. In the other side, because in the midterm national development planning 2020 until 2024, like I explained before, we also try to encourage all the law enforcement agency and also the people of Indonesia to change the mindset in law enforcement process from the punitive to the restorative justice mechanism. So luckily, we also have a collaboration with the civil society how to build some mapping what is actually the existing regulation set about the process of the restorative justice. And also we try to explain and encourage and discuss more with the legal institution And nowadays we have already since 2018, and it is revised in 2019. The police have already concluded their own internal regulation how to handle the cases within the within the approachment of the restorative justice. And also we have the attorney general office. They conclude already at AGO regulation number 15 year 2020, and it can be utilized by the attorney to stop the cases when they seem that the cases is potentially settled by concluding the mediation and other mechanism that is not going to be handled by the legal system. I mean, from the police to the attorney general, and also to the court, and etc. and etc. So they have the mechanism to stop the cases. They have some indicators to stop the cases. And nowadays, well, because this is new, the regulation is new, the Attorney General Office has concluded 65 cases, which is, we can see that this is related to the vulnerable population, the poor society. So I think it is good to see that that kind of from the policy to the implementation, we already have a similar perception on how to how to to provide the access to justice for the vulnerable people. Well, I'm trying to add to the last Ibu Mrs. Maya. Uh-huh. That I agree with the about the data. And nowadays the government also have the similar program. Well, it was started in 2017, and because like Ibu Maya said that the data is silo, and well, somehow it's very challenging to have the red line between the data amongst the legal institution. So we will build we're still building the system based on the technology and information that is replicate in the legal institution, legal enforcement institution. So we know the data from the police, how many cases from the people, and how many cases that is processed and then going to the Attorney General Office, and how many handled in the court, and how many is going to be executed in the correctional institution. So this kind of data could provide some information for the policymakers to see what kind of legal political, I know the maybe the criminal policy, for example, should be done by the government based on the situation in the society. Well, thank you, Ivy. Maybe that's my response.
Thank you. Yeah, really great to hear that, Ibu Hesti. So next, I'd like to call on Mr. Murteza Khan from the Bangladesh Business and Disability Network to share how the business community in Bangladesh has joined efforts to advance the right to employment for people with disabilities. Murteza?
Yes, hello. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so thank you, everyone. Wonderful to be here and participating. So BBDN, which is the Bangladesh Business and Disability Network, was launched by the Bangladesh Employers Federation as a network of employers, employer associations, disability organizations, and civil society organizations, such as BLAST, who's one of the organizers today, a very valuable resource member of BBDN. And we've been very closely supported by development partners, being inspired actually by the ILO's Global Business and Disability Network. And what we're really aiming to do is building a disability inclusive labor market system and representing the collective voice of employers in the discourse on disability, which has traditionally been driven from the development sector. Really working on three broad areas. One is about raising awareness about the need for disability inclusion. Secondly, to provide inclusion services to build the disability confidence of employers. And thirdly, by carrying out advocacy with relevant stakeholders. Because our objectives really require cooperation of the different sectors and stakeholders, as disability inclusion is in a sense a society-wide issue requiring interventions at various levels and stages. And our network is really built on these partnerships. You know, employers were hiring people with disabilities, and disability organizations have been working towards empowerment, skills development, and employment of people with disabilities. But no platform existed to bring all the stakeholders together to strategically work on the challenges, opportunities, and possible solutions towards building a more inclusive workforce. So we've really been leveraging the expertise and experience of our members, who also support us with yearly membership fees, sponsorships, and we also complement their work. On the one hand, to support employers to build their disability confidence, and on the other hand, to facilitate more meaningful employment opportunities for people with disabilities through an ecosystem-based approach, you know, by working with partners who deliver on different parts of the delivery chain. And currently, we are working on two UK government FCDO-funded consortia programs to test and generate evidence on what works to employ people with disabilities. And again, as we are working in a consortia, we have global agencies such as the ILO, World Bank, providing their expertise next to national and international disability-focused organizations. We have another project supported by the EU under the leadership of the ILO, which is really looking at access to skills training for people with disabilities and building the capacity of training institutions to facilitate more training for people with disabilities. And finally, also working closely with the support of the German government, GIZ, on return to work and rehabilitation of people who are getting injured or becoming disabled through industrial accidents and occupational hazards. And part of this work involves proposing amendments to the Bangladesh Labor Act and conducting the necessary advocacy with the government, employers, and workers' associations. And to do so, we need to really work through a collaborative approach, build consensus amongst the stakeholders. That's the only way we think we can achieve sustainable progress. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Murtaza. So I want to turn to a question, just picking up on what you shared, Murtaza, picking up a question from the chat. Mahbub Alam asked a question to actually any of our speakers. Perhaps Murtaza will also have thoughts. So here's what was said. Although the media can play a vital role to disseminate legal messages to the masses, how can people with disabilities, particularly who are hearing impaired and visually impaired, receive the legal messages from the media? In particular, Mahbub notes that community radio is an effective tool to disseminate legal messages towards the people who live in remote areas. Murtaza, do you want to take it, or should I open to the speakers?
Sure. Are you still able to hear me?
Yes. Please
Okay.
go ahead.
No, absolutely. And actually, one of the things we saw once COVID took a grip was there was definitely asymmetric information available, and particularly for marginalized groups such as people with disabilities, you know, our partners, and we did some surveys to see to what extent they were knowledgeable about, you know, some of the messages that were coming out from the government. And quite right, having more accessible ways of dissemination of information is quite important. I mean, it's good to see in Bangladesh now some of the TV channels will have, for example, interpreters with sign language available to make some of these important announcements, also with the news channels. And increasingly, there is an attempt to try to make more access to information accessible. For example, we're working with one of the larger job portals right now to make their information accessible for people with visual impairments. And it really requires building a lot of capacity and ensuring that the right technology is also deployed, and people are really aware of this need to do it. And then the good thing is there are a lot of organizations and agencies who can certainly support to make information accessible and build capacity in that sense. So we're seeing some of these good examples cropping up.
Thank you so much, Murtaza. So from here, I want to turn to Padma. Padma, women are particularly impacted by limited access to and collaboration across informal and formal justice systems. It's a challenge that's currently amplified by a rise in gender-based violence during the coronavirus lockdowns. How should the specific legal needs of women and girls be addressed in legal empowerment efforts? And what are the challenges in services for this broader community? And I also note that Ms. Faustina Pereira has asked you more about the Mongolian government's recognition of paralegals in Mongolia and other countries in the chat, and wanted to give you an opportunity to also respond more to that now.
Thank you. Thank you all the questions. I tried to answer it in the chat box very briefly, but I guess we have a limited time so that I cannot really go into much details. But, you know, I just have to really note that all of these concept of the paralegalism and the concept of paralegal is quite new in Mongolia, and we're trying to kind of control and create the narrative of what it is in our context. So basically, so far we've been engaging with the different stakeholders and institutions who would support us and who would help us to bring along these positive narratives about paralegal work in Mongolia. And so it's been only like 4 years since we kind of trying to introduce these mechanisms, and we finally have some policy document, the National Program on Public Legal Education for All, that indicates that really, even though it says public legal education, but it really includes all of the aspects of the legal empowerment work, really knowing the law, using the law, and shaping the law. So basically, it's really the legal empowerment program. So we're happy to have that, but having the document is one thing, but how to really implement it in real life and making change in people's life is another thing. We are really yet to come to this kind of implementation, but I guess we're like kind of in a good start. So coming back to the question about the woman, I don't think I'm really in a good position to talk about it because I'm not really directly working with the communities, but I do I do have some several partners who are dealing with these issues, and I've been from the information I'm receiving and with interaction of some of the paralegals and visiting some of the communities, I could only say that, you know, the mechanism, like legislative and structural sort of framework to fight against gender-based violence in Mongolia itself is really young, and it's quite new. And we just had a new law, and it's still like in the early stages of implementation, and some of the infrastructure is not yet to be established. I'd just like to bring a couple of examples. One of our partners, A Beautiful Heart, the NGO working with the victims, supporting the victims of the sexual violence and domestic violence, are working with the communities in the most remote and smaller villages, and trying to, train and work with the paralegals, the community leaders who could help the survivors and the victims of the domestic violence. But we had made quite a good discoveries that would help in development of the improvement of this legislative and infrastructure framework to fight and protect the victims of discovery. Because, you know, the context, even though Mongolia is a very homogeneous country, because the difference between this, city, capital city, and the remote villages are quite different. And these legislative anti-domestic violence law is not really helping the people in the remote villages because of the lack of law enforcement infrastructure there. So basically, our partner is really looking for the alternative solutions where you don't have the infrastructure that the legislation is asking, the law is asking, and it's kind of impossible to be implemented and to protect the victims. The second example would be our partner, the National Association of the Wheelchair Population, is helping the survivors and the victims of the domestic violence within their the community of disabled people. And we also had a surprise discoveries that the current system is not reaching out to the disabled community. The people with, especially the blind people, are not accessing any sort of information and services provided by this system. So basically, the Wheelchair Association is changing the service-oriented activity towards that more advocacy-oriented activity to really make sure that there's the organization, especially these civil society groups who are doing this legal empowerment work, who are providing this necessary information to their community, need to be supported and funded by the government, because they are, without them, it's essentially the service, the structure is not working and is not really including the most vulnerable ones. So the kind of silver lining of this coronavirus era is that most of our partners are really shifting their services and their the outreach outreach kind of tools online and you know, and then, you know, we're kind of reallocating some of the resources to help the communities to elevate their digital literacy and how to use internet and how to provide some like corners and spaces where the community members are safely access and freely access internet. So those are kind of some of the experiences that I could share in this regard. And I'll be happy to share more details and make sure to connect our partners, whoever interested.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, all in the spirit of collaboration. All right, we're coming up against our time, but before we wrap up and turn things over to the closing segment or closing panel, I'd like to ask Amélie Desjardins, the Legal Program Manager for Asia Pacific at the Thomson Reuters Foundation, to share how trust law can support legal empowerment efforts across the region. Amélie?
Yes, hi everyone. Thank you so much. Very grateful to be here today. It's wonderful to hear. So yeah, quick note about what we're doing here at Trust Law. You might have heard on the second session, my colleague Trishna, who's the legal program manager based in India, covering South Asia, including Bangladesh, also shared a bit of what we're doing. I'm based in Bangkok, covering for APAC. So Trust Law is a platform that connects NGOs and social enterprise to free legal support. So we provide, it's a membership-based platform. It's free for everyone. It's a lifetime membership as well, so no need to renew it. And the type of advice and the type of the work we do is we help NGOs finding legal advice and legal research. So we don't do direct representations and litigations, but we're a clearinghouse that helps finding lawyers to help organizations, for example, carry on like comparative legal research in different countries that can help you drive then your own advocacy agenda. That's just an example. And I just wanted to say also how we work with the private sector, because I mean, we have more than 7,000 members across the globe, and we have more than 1,000 law firms who are working with us. And we have law firms, but we also have in-house legal counsels who are supporting us. And at the Brothers Reuters Foundations, we have a department called Inclusive Economies, who aims to be shifting the business models from big corporations to a more sustainable one. So cleaning supply chains from modern slavery and other initiatives. So what we're doing is like we do events, we do roundtables, working groups to try to like raise awareness, brainstorm on how to drive change from inside out. So I know it's a very packed event. I know there's many people who have lots to say. I'll stop right here. But if you think that if you're in need of legal support and you are, and you need assistance from a pro bono firm, go have a look at, Thomson Reuters Foundation, Trust Law, our website. Also, I will be sharing my my email address. Feel free to drop me a line if you are unsure, if maybe I spoke too fast also or whatever. If you need support or need help with anything, just let me know and I will see how we can help you. Thanks everyone, and speak soon, hopefully.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Amelie, and thank you to our fabulous panel and all of our interveners for sharing your thoughtful insights and experiences. So in an effort to bridge the justice gap and work towards a world where governments are more responsive to their citizens, it is imperative that we make bold and transformative commitments on justice that help people in crisis address systemic inequalities and rebuild the bonds of trust. Commitments on justice can take various forms. In addition to leveraging the OGP process, or if your country is not an OGP member, the Pathfinders for Peaceful, Just, and Inclusive Societies has prepared a fact sheet that explains the types of commitments that justice actors and organizations can make and how you can register a commitment. The fact sheet is on the landing page for this virtual meeting, and it's being pasted in the chat box right now. I think having heard all our awesome panelists and interventionists, we see that partnerships with the government can strengthen legal empowerment efforts across the region. And using platforms such as the Open Government Partnership and the UN Acceleration Action Registration process can create more opportunities for legal empowerment practitioners to engage with government. Thank you again to all our panelists. And now we are pleased to bring you the closing segment of our Justice for All webinar series.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Marlon Manuel from Namati and the Legal Empowerment Network. Thank you, Ivy, for moderating our final webinar. I think we had We had some technical problems with the video. Okay, we can proceed. We are at the end of our webinar series, and we want to thank those of you who have joined us across our 3 sessions. And even if you have not completed all 3 webinar sessions, we thank you for joining us. We started with the first session in September at the Asia Pro Bono Conference and Access to Justice Exchange. Across the Asia and Pacific regions, formal and informal justice institutions are working to promote access to justice for all. And while each sector's strategies and tools are tailored to meet the specific needs of the populations they serve, they all use elements of legal empowerment to promote legal awareness, education, and to support justice initiatives aimed at placing individuals and communities at the center of solving their own justice and development challenges. Despite all these efforts, access to justice remains elusive to many, with opaque processes, unequal access, and discrimination disproportionately affecting marginalized and vulnerable groups and populations. COVID-related shocks dealt to justice systems, both formal and informal, have posed unique challenges and obstacles that threaten to widen the global justice gap. Where there are pitfalls, however, there are also opportunities for innovation and recalibration towards people-centered justice. As reinforced in the Justice for All and the Public Health Emergency Briefing, justice workers and systems on the front line of the pandemic must work together and support each other through this difficult challenge and ensure that justice remains at the heart of building back better. The values of transparency, accountability, participation must also remain at the center of responses, with good examples of how some countries are doing so in OGP's guide to open government and the coronavirus paper, with focus on justice. In an effort to close the justice gap, the Bangladesh Legal Aid and Services Trust, BLAST, Pathfinders for Peaceful, Just and Inclusive Societies, the Legal Empowerment Network, and Open Government Partnership hosted these virtual gatherings of legal professionals, justice administrators, and grassroots justice advocates from both the formal and informal sector across the Asia and the Pacific regions to share experiences, solutions, challenges, as well as broaden the conversation to explore legal empowerment from a regional perspective. So what did we learn in our 3 webinar sessions? In our first session back in September on adaptation and collaboration, grassroots justice work in the pandemic, we had a conversation on how grassroots justice groups adapt to the pandemic as they continue their legal empowerment work to address the justice challenges brought about or aggravated by the current health crisis. We also tackled how the health crisis adversely impacted and continues to impact those working with grassroots communities and how they cope and respond to the challenges. In our second session, focusing on people-centered justice and best practices in the region, our lead discussions called for stronger partnerships and collaborations across the region to address key justice problems experienced by marginalized groups during the pandemic. They emphasized the need to capture and analyze the new initiatives to ensure people-centered justice across the region and to ensure knowledge sharing on how formal and informal justice systems have been accessed at the grassroots level. And today, in the webinar, in the discussion that we had earlier, we learned how partnership between government and the legal empowerment community, and also with philanthropy and the private sector, can grow legal empowerment initiatives, which emphasizes that really no one can do it alone. We have to do it together. We have to do it together. So before we get to our next steps, we have invited leaders across the region to provide their thoughts to guide us as we close the webinar series and as we advance our collaboration across the region. First, we will have a video message from the Honorable Andrew Julia, Deputy Secretary of the Ministry of Justice and Legal Affairs of the Solomon Islands.
Good afternoon, everyone. As the Deputy Secretary at the Ministry of Justice of the Solomon Islands, I would like to thank the organizers for convening this regional gathering to advance justice for all in the Asia-Pacific region. The Solomon Islands has been a strong supporter of the Sustainable Development Goals, Goal 16, the goal that promises to deliver justice for all, drives the work of my ministry. Our progress towards this ambitious goal, however, is threatened by the COVID pandemic. As the government works towards mitigating the impacts of the pandemic, it is imperative that we invest in justice to build our society after the pandemic. Investing in justice is crucial for restoring and building the bonds of trust between government and the people of my country. It is also indispensable for conflict prevention and sustaining peace. The Solomon Islands is proud of its work to bring justice closer to the people. We have launched several initiatives, including one establishing a public website with information about all court cases. In rural areas, my government has encouraged alternative dispute resolution and radio programs focusing on rights and the law. Two, we have proposed new legislation that would empower village leaders to adjudicate all land issues at the local level. Land disputes represent the majority of justice problems that people in my country encountered in the meantime. Three, with the support of the Australian government, we have recruited additional paralegals to work with local communities to resolve people's justice problems. And four, the Public Solicitor's Office in the Solomon Islands runs the weekly advice clinics, which helps connect people with legal aid. On the international stage, the Solomon Islands has been active in promoting justice for all. In June 2019, the Solomon Islands was proud to join 13 other conflict-affected countries of the G7 Plus in the signing of a declaration and joint action plan on equal justice for all in The Hague in June 2019. The action plan includes a set of commitments for all G7 countries to adopt to ensure justice for all, including the development of national justice sector strategies and improve data to better understand the justice needs of the people. In concluding, I would like to share some reflections on how we can advance people-centered justice in our respective countries. First, we must nurture a culture of data, evidence, and learning. All justice providers need the skills to understand and learn from data about justice problems and evidence of what works. Secondly, we must increase diversity. Justice will be more effective if they look like the communities they serve. Greater representation of women is especially important. Third, we must adopt new training materials. People-centered justice requires a shift from training that focuses solely on legal knowledge to training the emphasis of problem solving. Fourth, we must support innovation and technology for justice for all. We must foster companies, the private sector, civil society, and the government to increase and diversify the funding for legal technology developments. We must also create mechanisms for rapidly funding innovations that provide justice services remotely. Fifth, we need to create effective partnership between governments, civil society, and the private sector. Government must build relationship with people and communities. Justice institutions will need a new culture of collaboration, of openness, and of responsiveness to people and their needs. Lastly, we must make a greater investment in people-centered justice. And we must also prioritize people-centered justice in our budgets and ensure that justice is an important component of response and recovery strategies in relation to COVID-19. I will leave you by calling upon all my fellow ministers from the Asia Pacific region to transform commitments on justice for all into action. The pathway to justice can only be built if we do so together and in strong collaboration with all actors committed to building a just world. Thank you, and I'm delighted to have been asked to participate in this exciting meeting.
Wonderful. That was Deputy Secretary Andrew Julia of the Solomon Islands. Next, I'd like to invite Nicholas Booth. Nick, Officer in Charge, Democratic Governance and Peace Building at the Bangkok Regional Hub of the United Nations Development Program, UNDP. Nick?
Yes, hi. Can you hear me and see me?
Yes, we can hear you. We can see you. Perfect. You can start now, please.
Okay. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me to address, to be part of this final panel. And that's something I'm really very honored to do because I think it's a great initiative. It's very nice to see so many old friends, not least Marlon. And this sharing that you've been doing is tremendously it's tremendously important, and really, it really chimes in with one of the points I wanted to make. I've been given 5 minutes, so I thought I should make 5 points. And my first 2 points were looking on the past, but 3 of them focused like they should on the future. And the ones that are looking at the past and the present, I mean, I guess on the one side, I hardly need to make the first point, which is the way that the pandemic, has really set back what was already a global crisis for access to justice, and not just a global crisis, but very much for our region, a crisis for access to justice. And it was the way that in which all the most marginalized and discriminated groups found themselves even more isolated. And the pandemic actually gave them a greater need for redress at a time when courts shut down. It was even harder for them to find access to sources of legal support, just as they were also cut off from all the other, from all their other rights. So, so of course that was a huge crisis, and that leads to my second point, which is, and really to pay tribute, Marlon, to many of the people on this call, and to the way in which, as you said, the extraordinary response from pro bono lawyers, from NGOs, from grassroots, justice advisors. I mean, there's been such an extraordinary response, and from courts themselves. I mean, I've been looking at, I know a lot of participants from Bangladesh, including Sarah, but many others. So, I mean, this initiative, so although the courts closed down in Bangladesh, they very soon learned how to go digital. And now the My Court initiative, which we've been supporting, it managed to set up virtual bail hearings, which led 10,000 people out of bail in 3 months, where they can actually go back and be with their families and help support their families in the crisis. So, I mean, I think that was already a tremendous thing, and we're really looking forward to seeing how that is going to now really do the same for survivors of SGBV, workers who've been laid off or owed back pay, small businesses that can't enforce their claims, and the many others who are really suffering from the lack of access to the formal justice system. So the courts have done their bit across the region. Bangladesh was just one good example. Legal aid advisors, CSOs, grassroots justice have done their best across the region. And what's been so important has been the experience sharing. And Marlon, the Global Legal Empowerment Network that NAMITY has helped sponsor, and this event are great examples of the way that people are learning from each other how to respond to this. And I'm really amazed at the transformation that's happened in the ecosystem. And I also really wanted to adopt the point you made that none of us can do this alone. And there's 2 dimensions to that. I mean, so one of them indeed is that actually this network, and now enabling this networking, and despite all the challenges, being able to share so many experiences, I know has led to a step change in what people have learned how to do and how quickly managed to respond to this crisis. And then the other thing is, it is an ecosystem, so everybody needs to be part of it. The courts, and the prosecutors' officers, and the state legal aid side, the lawyers, the pro bono lawyers, the CSOs, and the UN. And I think that where we see our role in UNDP, we see our role as a sort of as a connector and a convener, because we understand this ecosystem, and we know that absolutely everybody has a critical part, and that the justice system, we can't begin to move the needle back, well, not back, towards a well-functioning system giving access to justice that there's never adequately been. But we won't move the needle in that direction without all working together. And UNDP, we see ourselves called upon to help with that. So let me make 3 points, looking at the future. And the first of them is, the building forward better that we need to recover from the pandemic. It's going to be just as important in access to justice in every other area. And one thing I would say is that the acceleration in digital transformation, taking on digital innovations, that's here to stay, and many aspects of that are a good thing. But at the same time, I think we'll need to pay much more attention to the digital divide and all kinds of barriers, which are technological, but they're also financial and they're cultural. There are many barriers which are denying, which can deny the benefits of this digital transformation to those who need it most. I think that we need to really insist, we in UNDP and everyone, we need to insist on accessibility and safety and privacy by design. And we also need to really ensure that justice seekers are at the center of the development of digital justice. So we in UNDP are working very hard when we do work with governments to really make sure that the design of these services starts from and fully engages with the people for whom they are being designed. And one important point is, we will not achieve universal accessibility through digital devices. The most marginalized will continue to be left behind. Some digital divides cannot be easily bridged. And what I want to say is, and what we say to governments is, these digital innovations will save money, and the money that's been saved needs to be invested on prioritizing and targeting those who are still left behind and will continue to be left behind by digital, because they can't be reached by digital innovations because they can't access them. And that's one way in which I think this digital transformation, if you put all of those elements and require all of those elements, I think that it can be a force for good. The second priority for us is, we are going to carry on working with the courts themselves, because we've been working in the ASEAN region on judicial integrity with the judiciaries in ASEAN for a few years now, and we think it's really important because really courts are the only ones who can really reform themselves. They're jealous of their independence, and that's fully to be respected. So one has to work with courts in a special way, and they are important parts of the ecosystem. And we have had through setting up our judicial integrity network in ASEAN, we have had really good experiences of working on court excellence and judicial integrity with them. And we've had great partnerships, including with the International Consortium of Court Excellence. And I'm really looking forward to a stronger partnership, for example, with the Open Justice Initiative of OGP and others, because we all share a common interest in greater transparency, greater integrity, and better court excellence. And again, the digital transformation is important here too, because digital transformation in the courts, it could be leveraged for greater transparency and access to justice, and it should be. Equally, on the other side, there are great risks. As artificial intelligence is being more and more adopted in courts and decision making, actually, it risks reducing transparency and accountability of judicial decision making. Because we have less and less access to what kind of data is being used for the kind of advice that artificial intelligence is producing. And we also have to concern ourselves about whether virtual hearings can still provide, can still meet fair trial human rights standards and can still provide open justice. And I think another priority for us working with judiciaries is gender equality in the judiciary itself, because this is a problem that still hasn't been adequately addressed, and until women are equally represented at the highest levels of the judiciary, women can never have equal access to justice. And the last point I'd like to make is the last priority for UNDP. I mean, we will still very much focus on innovations in justice beyond technological ones. Actually, we've been, again, the Grassroots Justice Prize of Namity has really shown this. The work of Hill really shows this. There's a huge need, as we've all recognized, there's a huge need for innovations because the existing technologies and mechanisms for solving giving people their rights and solving their disputes are still too inadequate and inaccessible and will never meet the demand. So we need a lot of innovation in finding new ways new alternative mechanisms and methods for people to access justice. So, we need to keep our focus on those innovations, many of which don't necessarily have anything to do with technology. All of them, however, bring justice closer to those who seek it. And that's another important area for partnership. We in UNDP should invest in it. It's very much in line with the importance we place on innovation to bring service and rights closer to the rights holders and those who need access to those services. We need to be doing that in justice too. We need to continue and strengthen our partnerships with those who are working on the same things. Thank you very much indeed, and I'm really looking forward to working with you all in the future. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Nick. And indeed, we cannot build back better unless we do it together. I will now call on one of the organizers for this webinar series, Sarah Hossein, Honorary Executive Director of BLAST. Sarah will provide her thoughts. Sarah?
Thanks a lot, Marlon. Well, at first, I'd like to say we're very privileged at BLAST to have been part of this conversation on people-centered justice. And we're really grateful to all our partners, OGP and Namity and Pathfinders, and of course to the Task Force on Justice, whose work I think kicked this off. I think this is, as Nick said now, this is sort of an issue from before the pandemic, and it will continue to be one afterwards about how do we share experiences and learn from each other. And I think for us at BLAST, this has always been something we want to do, but it's too often really the daily pressures of casework and community outreach and campaigns and advocacy just mean that you can't really do that in the way that you want to. And paradoxically, I think we've all seen that as during the time of the pandemic, we've come under much more pressure. We've had to deal with all kinds of new things. We've also found these new opportunities of communication. And I think this conversation has reminded us, these three conversations we've had and all of the work we've done around it, has reminded us how urgent it is to work together and to address the justice gap, those 5.1 billion people who are not able to access justice. We've seen during this time that the issues around victims of crime have been highlighted more and more in our country. We've had people on the streets for the last few weeks talking about survivors of gender-based violence and this decade-long struggle to ensure protection, to ensure that the laws work. We are talking about people without identity documents, people who are landless, who don't have housing tenure, people in informal work, and the incredible pressures that everybody is coming under during the time of the pandemic. And we're talking also about people who are stateless, who are living in situations of extreme insecurity. So I think what these conversations have done for us, they've reminded us about, again, the need to look at and be with and work together with exactly these communities, those who are excluded. And they reminded us about how we need to sort of strengthen our voices and our partnerships to respond to this huge problem. I think we've seen in these conversations that bringing together rooted organizations that work on the ground, that work on the front lines of justice with communities, and bringing them together in partnerships with state bodies that have mandates under the constitutions and the laws to ensure justice can make a real difference. And we can work together with this shared commitment to achieving a goal of peaceful, just, and inclusive societies. I think we've heard a lot in the last three discussions, particularly in the first two, about the importance of grassroots human rights defenders getting the kind of protection that's needed as they confront the deep injustices that persist in our society, and as they also confront the new realities, extreme restrictions on freedom of expression or association or liberty. Nick Booth talked just now about issues around surveillance and how that also would, issues around privacy and breaches and risks and threats. So we need to address all of that. And these conversations can help to inform each other of the risks we face, and also help us to think about how to overcome them. Knowing about each other's issues is an important and significant part of what we can do. Nick also, Nick and other speakers today talked about the use of technology. We know that has been the incredible new frontier that's opened up in terms of access and information. But I think it's also reminded us that technology is not the only thing. The fact that we are building these communications, the fact that we're building this network of trust and confidence, and we're continuing to deepen and strengthen that, I think that's what's really important, that the technology has opened up the scope for communication, it's increased the scope for service, all of that has happened. But if we had only technology and no trust and confidence and no relationships, I don't think that we'd have an answer. We'd have a lot of fear, and we'd have a world where exactly it's something other than us. It's not the humans, it's the artificial intelligence that rules. So I think that gives us a lot of hope that we've built these connections. We have today Indonesia, Bangladesh, India, Philippines, so many countries have been part of this conversation. And I think that really, I'd want to end just by inviting everyone who's been part of this to come forward to say, how can we take it further and deeper? How can we now we've tried to have a regional conversation, almost an impossibility in the Asia Pacific. Can we have sub-regional conversations? Can we have a couple of countries coming together to communities, groups within these countries? And I think anyone who's been part of this conversation now can propose how we take that forward and how we build this dialogue and look at our practices, reflect on the work we're doing and see how we can do it better while we keep up the scrutiny on what's going wrong. So thanks again to everybody. And I hope this is not going to be the end. It's the end of this series, but I hope we're going to have another series or several more to take the conversation in a different place. Thank you.
Several more. Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Donabad, it's been great working with you on this series. And I'm sure we will have more and we'll have follow-up conversations after this. Another partner that we have for this series is the Open Government Partnership. And the OGP helped lead the last session on partnerships that we just had. I will now call on Shreya. Shreya Basu is the Deputy Director of Country Support and Asia Pacific Lead from the OGP to share some remarks. Shreya?
Thanks, Marlon. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Marlon. You know, at the beginning of 2020, before we knew what this year had in store for us, or what COVID had in store for us, OGP, the Open Government Partnership, launched its three-year plan with inclusion and justice as centerpieces of this plan, the centerpieces of our priorities and our strategies going forward. Addressing the historic gaps in information, access, participation, particularly by vulnerable groups, exacerbated much more acutely by the pandemic and its effects, as we've heard, you know, from Nick and Sarah and throughout this series, really needs a concerted, proactive, and I would add a sincere effort to address issues to ensure that governments really deliver for those that need them the most. Open government can be a part of the answer to closing this justice gap, but only if it is open government for all. If it embraces ideas, and as Nick said, innovations coming from all stakeholders in society. The International Task Force on Justice, as many of you have referenced earlier, has called on governments to develop strategies to deliver equal access to justice for all by 2030. And OGP action plans can be a critical platform or critical vehicle for taking concrete steps towards this goal. Within the partnership, we've seen over the last several years, many countries recognizing this, or rather starting to recognize this and take action in their biennial action plans that are co-created with civil society, independently monitored. You know, this was exemplified earlier this afternoon by the examples we heard from Indonesia and Mongolia. And we see that these reforms increasingly involve justice institutions, prioritize actions that improve accessibility, transparency, and accountability of justice systems and services. So this is a slow but good start. Since the start of the pandemic, we at the Open Government Partnership have been calling on all members, on all stakeholders for an open response and open recovery. And we do believe that open government responses can be central to a more just recovery, but only if we see that accountability, participation, and inclusion are not an afterthought, not tick boxes to check. And we know this can be done. So just a few days ago, OGP had its inaugural meeting on the OGP Coalition on Justice, and organized the Global Dialogue for Justice Leaders along with partners, where we had over 20 ministers of justice from around the world. We heard both during this webinar series as well as in these coalition meetings how different countries are starting to adapt their justice systems to the pandemic. On the one hand, through the use of technology to create solutions, not just for opening up court proceedings, but also broader processes. But as many of before have said, that this is not just about techno-solutionism, also taking measures to address concerns about those detained and incarcerated being at the higher risk for infection, domestic and family violence issues during this time. So we encourage those of you coming from OGP member countries to engage with the OGP co-creation process in your countries. Use your action plans to advocate for, to include and implement justice commitments that directly address problems related to the pandemic, but also correct the historical inequalities in our systems. Entry points for this, as we've heard earlier, can be access to justice, open justice issues, as well as ensuring that open government initiatives like sunshine laws and anti-corruption efforts have justice at their core, at the front and center of these reforms. And of course, it's our pleasure and privilege to work with partners like Namati, Pathfinders, UNDP, and national coalitions like BLAST to advance and support this agenda. So we hope to continue this dialogue with more OGP members joining the Justice Coalition, making genuine, ambitious commitments, delivering on them, but also with non-members in this region, advancing this agenda, building and sustaining this community we have identified and worked with through this series. So echoing Sarah's ask there for ideas on how we take this forward. And then finally, as a co-organizer of the series, I would be remiss to not end by thanking, the wonderful team of interpreters, Stamber and her team, the people that bring series like these alive and make it accessible to more audiences. Our partners in justice, Pathfinders, Anthony, Ariana, Marlon Mutiana from the Legal Empowerment Network, Namati, Sarah and her team from BLAST, and the indefatigable Maha Javed, who's been a tireless force behind the scenes to bring this series. I wouldn't try to affiliate her because we really do claim her as one of our own for the entire community. So big thanks to everyone who has contributed, listened, given ideas, and we look forward to more ideas on how we can continue this work going forward. Over to you, Marlon, and once again, a big thanks to everyone.
Thank you, Shreya. And OGP is celebrating its 10th anniversary, right, this year. Okay, and last, but certainly not the least, Ambassador Leone Culinaire, former Netherlands ambassador to Bangladesh and currently Special Envoy on Access to Justice, will provide some reflections. Ambassador Culinaire is a fellow at NYU CIC, where the Pathfinders for Peaceful, Just, and Inclusive Societies, one of the organizers of this series, is also housed. Ambassador Culinaire?
Okay, thank you so much for this invitation. And I'm afraid I'm the only one who is so old-fashioned. I don't have a headset. So if you don't hear me well enough, just tell me, okay? This Asia-Pacific dialogue has brought together a wide range of actors, from paralegals and lawyers securing the rights of the most marginalized to government officials, running legal aid programs, and donors supporting them. Everybody is committed to ensure justice for all. This regional platform has enabled the showcasing and sharing of experiences from diverse contexts, and the dialogue needs to continue urgently. In my last posting abroad, serving as the Netherlands ambassador to Bangladesh, I was privileged to be involved in some remarkable innovations in legal empowerment. We invested in adolescent girls learning about their rights. In community legal clinics with frontline paralegal and community health workers, we provided information and access to services for women survivors of sexual and gender-based violence. These and many more examples of people-centered justice can be found across the whole region. After that work, I was the special envoy on access to justice for Minister Kaag. I worked with CIC and Hill to form strategies for people-centered justice. Governments around the world are truly in crisis mode. They are trying to manage public health emergency and to respond to the broader impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, as it batters economies and imperils the legitimacy of institutions. This crisis has deepened inequalities, exposed and exacerbated injustices, and promulgated potential conflicts in every region. Discussions during this virtual series have highlighted that the need for justice is growing as the pandemic spreads. Previous financial crises and natural disasters increased demands for justice. 6 key areas are affected most: crime, housing and land, family disputes, unemployment and bankruptcy, money and debt, and access to public services. We heard it this whole day. In a survey of 270 justice leaders from 20 countries conducted by Hill, employment, debt, and bankruptcy were expected to account for the largest increases in justice problems as a result of the pandemic. Many reports have also pointed to an alarming incidence of domestic violence impacting women and their children. It will be difficult for justice systems to meet the increased demand. Even before the pandemic, the Task Force on Justice estimated that over 5 billion people lacked meaningful access to justice. The health crisis has further compounded the global justice gap. Research before the crisis has showed that donor investment for justice had declined by over 40% over the past 4 years. In fragile and conflict-affected states, only 1.5% of official development assistance has been spent on justice. We must prioritize justice as an integral part of response and recovery strategies, especially in conflict-affected countries. Justice actors, formal as well as informal, are key to ensure that public health measures are effective and fair. To prevent the economic crisis from exacerbating inequalities and creating new grievances, investment in legal empowerment is required. More inclusive institutions are needed so that all groups can participate fully in their economy and society. If we really are serious about building back better, we need to fill in justice gaps where they are starkest in order to prevent inequality from rising, grievances from growing, and conflict from spreading. In the months and years ahead, societies will face growing and unpredictable stresses. People-centered justice approaches can help societies manage the institutional, social, and economic fallout from the pandemic. Increased investment will need to be combined with more cost-effective solutions in order for formal and informal justice providers to play their part in mitigating the economic impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic and in rebuilding economies in its wake. Governments should devote a portion of emergency economic support packages to people-centered justice services to create a social multiplier of the impacts of their spending. We do not see that enough. We need to create funding partnerships with other sectors, such as healthcare and employment, non-government actors, including private foundations and business associations. Rapid funding mechanisms should be created to support grassroots justice providers who are being asked to do more and take on larger risks while they work under more difficult circumstances and their funding is under threat. Hill is trying to acquire finances to set up a fund for startups on justice innovation so that they can survive this pandemic. and go on with their work. Investing in justice for all is just as crucial as our collective action on climate, as well as our collective action on the other goals and targets in the 2030 agenda. We must place justice at the heart of sustainable development, put people at the center of justice systems, and move from justice for the few to justice for all. There is a need for stronger partnerships between governments, civil society, and the private sector. For example, the Netherlands has pledged to double the numbers of people who have access to justice through its Global Development Corporation, and half of them must be women. The Netherlands have kept that promise and more. Call upon all governments, multilateral institutions, and donors to accelerate action and make bold and transformative commitments on justice for all. And not only commitments, I've been in too many pledging conferences where the promises did not come true. We need to follow up on the commitments as well. And to my friends in Bangladesh, I want to say, Donobat and Koda Hafez. And for my friends in Indonesia, Terima kasih and Sampai Jumpa. And for all of you, thank you so much and goodbye.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Indeed, justice for all, and we have to follow up on the commitments. And we are seeing lots of support, lots of commitments across many organizations to grow and build this community. And speaking of follow-up, before we end today, we want to share some of our proposed next steps after the webinar series. From the very rich, the very meaningful conversations that we've had in the 3 webinars, we have prepared an outcome document. It's a short document that outlines the key recommendations coming out of the discussions from September until the discussion that we had earlier before this closing session. We will share this document at the website of the Pathfinders, and you will find a link, and the link will be posted in the chat box for comments. Okay, so before we end, may we request everyone to put on your video, so we will take a picture, and hopefully we can see everyone, and we can fit into the screen, including the attendees. So we are, I think we're doing that now.
I cannot turn on my camera, Marlon.
Okay, that's okay. Those who can, please turn on your camera.
Now I can.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. And we will take one picture before we finally say goodbye. I think we have a number of pages. Who's taking a picture? let's make sure that somebody's taking a picture, because we're all smiling. You might miss. Okay. Thank you, everyone. So on behalf of the organizers of this webinar series, the Pathfinders for Peaceful, Just, and Inclusive Societies, the Bangladesh Legal Aid Services Trust, Open Government Partnership, and the Legal Empowerment Network convened by Namati, we thank everyone for being with us in the 3 webinar sessions, and for being with us in the webinar series that we have organized. And as Sarah said, we should have more conversations. We should have more discussion sessions in the region, and we should we look forward to those further conversations and the collaborations that will come out of the conversation. So again, thank you, everyone. Have a good day, good afternoon.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Marlon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marlon.
Marlon, brilliant
Thank you,
moderation.
everyone.
After a long time, see you,
everyone.
Marlon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.